When I can't sleep, things that run through my mind is my childhood sometimes, and the what do I want to say? Um, the times when my dad and I would have disagreements, and things my brothers and sisters and us used to do, things like that. Yeah, but I don't think I'd handle them any different now. I was an aggressive child, and lots of times I got in trouble because I had to say what I thought. My name is Sophia Saren. Maybe I should change that. Sophia Boric Saren. Well, I got to back up a little bit. My mom was Dad's second wife. He married Mother's cousin, whose name was Pauline Kanya, and she died giving birth to my half-sister, Wanda. And 6 months later, my dad married my mother, and I think mostly because he needed someone to take care of his children. He had a 3-year-old boy and 6-month-old baby girl. And he knew Grandma back in Poland. They were from the same neighborhood. But they were married in Chicago. And Dad came over when he was 17 years old, and Mother was 23. They came separate. They had nothing to do with each other when they came. But they knew each other, so we had more family in Chicago from Poland, and would visit. They always visited together. In those days, there was this Polish neighborhood, and there was this German neighborhood, and an Italian neighborhood, and not only the people living in homes, but the stores and the businesses and everything was of that nationality in that area. So you didn't really have to learn English because you could get along just fine in that particular neighborhood. We had two places.
Yeah.
The first place is one that Dad had originally. And then he bought another 40-acre farm with a house on it, and it had 2 bedrooms and attic, and it had a basement, but the basement was not a basement that you could sit and do things in. You could store things in there, but that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time there were, Tony, Paul, Wanda, Bill, Joe, and me. I think 7 children when we moved from that one house to the other one. And it was a 2-bedroom house. But Dad built on a little addition. We called it a porch. And he built a bedroom on the end of it, so that made it 3 bedrooms. And the older boys used to sleep up in the attic. So that took care of us. And of course, as they grew up, some of us would leave. Mostly as girls left. The girls left before the boys from home. They lived pretty much a normal life.
Mm-hmm.
Dad worked at different jobs. He never had a really steady job, because where we lived, there just wasn't anything like that to do. You could work on a railroad, and he worked for a man who pulled moss. The moss that they use in the greenhouses, they pulled it out of swamps and hauled it out on a dry land and spread it out and dried it. And then they had a press that they put it in and baled it in bales and sold it to greenhouses and things. And Dad worked for a man who was the boss of this.
Yeah.
And that was maybe the steadiest job that he had. And that only lasts so long, and that was done, you know. And then there were cranberries. So in the fall, they raked cranberries with a hand rake. It was like a box without a cover, and it had prongs in front, and they just go whoop. Yeah. Well, we were 10 in a family, so the first 5 were like a different family from the second 5. Both, by the way, we were raised by my parents. Now, the first 5 didn't have the, what's the word I want? Freedom to go and do what they wanted to and so on. Where the second 5, they could more or less, if they wanted to go somewhere, they just went. And it was okay with the parents. So my dad bought this radio. And, well, let's start from the beginning. We had this house we lived in, and the roof leaked. Every time it rained, we had to run around and get all the pots and pans we could and run up in the attic and set them up so that the water wouldn't leak down through the house. And my dad would not fix the roof because he was going to build a new house, and he was not putting any money into this old house. But he bought a radio, a nice radio for that time. It was, you know, a table radio. Nice, clear voice and everything. So every time it rained, Grandma would say, "Hurry up, get the radio, set it up on the roof. It's raining." Because he wouldn't spend the money on the roof, but he did buy the radio. That was her thing. Oh, yes, and I did love to read. And my older sister, Wanda, and I would have to clean house for Mother. I was to clean one room, and Wanda was to clean another room. And I would pick up a magazine and curl up in a chair and read. She'd have her room cleaned, and I hadn't started yet. Yes, my dad used to, when he'd catch me reading, he'd take my magazines and books and burn them. Well, they thought I was wasting my time. You know, in those days, girls weren't supposed to be smart. They're supposed to grow up, get married, have a family, and that's it. And for that, they didn't need an education. They didn't need to know how to write or read, because the girls weren't supposed to, like, take care of the finances of the house, the bookkeeping and stuff like that. That was the man's job, you know. So I only went to the 8th grade, and I graduated. At that time, you graduated from the 8th grade. I have a diploma. There were 8 grades in the school, from 1 through 8. It was a one-room schoolhouse. And when the classes were called up, the teacher would call like the 1st grade, and they'd come up to the front and have their class. And everybody else was sitting in the back doing their work, schoolwork. And she'd call the 1st grade, and then the 2nd, and then the 3rd. And there were X amount of minutes, and I don't remember now how long, up in front with the teacher in the class, till through to the 8th grade, 5 days a week. And we started school at 9 o'clock and came home, and we're in school till 3:30. When I went to school, I could not speak one single word in English. And we had a Polish teacher. And so when she couldn't get us to speak English so she could understand, she spoke Polish to us. Therefore, the first year we learned no English. Well, the parents wised up, and the next teacher they got next year could not speak Polish. She could only speak English. And we learned English the first year. And I used to learn different words, and I'd come home and teach them to my mother and father. That's how they learned the first part of English. Dad learned it faster because he went out to work and had to communicate in English. So it was hard at first, but he got pretty good. And Mother stayed talking Polish for a long time till we started to get married. And I married a man who didn't speak Polish. My sister Fran married a man who did not speak Polish. And so Mom started picking up English. And by the time she passed on, she spoke nothing but English. It was broken English. And some of the words she didn't know how to pronounce. But she certainly could get around good with her broken English. Yeah. And she was so proud of the fact that she could speak English. She spent the last 7 years of her life in a nursing home, and English was all they used there. There was no one to speak Polish to. And she was so proud that she could sit there and converse with the different people and get by.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the little town Neilsville. And I went to work there as a mother's helper. I was maybe 15 years old. I was working for $4 a week. And my dad thought I should send the money home, and I didn't. Instead, I bought me a pair of white shoes and a hat. Well, the shoes I might have needed, but I did not need the hat, but I bought it anyway. And I spent all the money. So Grandpa came to check me out to see what was going on and made me quit my job and took me home. That was that. Wasn't very smart because I needed clothes anyway, and if I didn't buy them myself, he would have had to dress me, you know.
Money,
They needed the money, but you know, as a youngster, I was too young to be really that smart that they needed the money, and I really should send it to them, you know. But when you go without stuff for a long time, you know, you just have your bare necessities, and you work and you earn the money, you want a couple things for yourself, you know? Mm-hmm. You just do. Mm-hmm. So I did. And because I was my dad's daughter, and very much like him, personality-wise, I did what I wanted to do. Just my money. And Catherine, it was someone she knew in a city called Port Edwards, Wisconsin. And I thought maybe I could handle it, but it included cooking. And although I was a pretty good cook for a young person, I wasn't a plain cook. I was not a fancy cook. I wasn't cooking fancy dishes, making fancy sauces and all this stuff. And the serving was, you know, you served from one side and you took your plate from the other and you passed one plate of stuff at a time and all this crap, you know, that all these things that I wasn't used to. And it was just overwhelming. And there was nobody there that would work with me, say, for a week, so I could get used to the house, you know. They all went away and left me alone in that house one day. And I was trying to do something, and I cut my finger, and I bled all over, and I thought, oh. And I just cried all day one day. And then I called home, and I said, I want to come home. That was the end of that. I don't think the fact that I was away from home bothered me so much. It was the type of environment. Mm-hmm. It was all out of... I went to work at the boarding house in town that was close to my house. And I was gone all week. I just got home weekends. And I had no problem whatsoever. And that was right after that. Mm-hmm. And I helped with like setting the table, and I helped in the kitchen, and I helped with the cleaning, and everything went fine. But it was more my type of environment. It was fine. Oh, I was 10 years old when I knew who he was. Not that I had anything to do with him,
Sure.
because he was 7 years older, so he was 17. And I was just a little bit of a girl. He was a big guy, and he had a head full of curly hair, and that's what I remembered about him. Yeah, I didn't date Grandpa till I was 18 years old. Well, he wanted to date me, and I didn't want to date him.
Why?
He had kind of a wild reputation. He liked to drive cars fast, and get in squabbles with his friends. He had a little reputation.
Right.
Well, it kind of grew. I worked for a lady that had a boarding house up in town, and he stayed there. And my brother worked with Axe. And one day I was home, one weekend I was at home, and my dad didn't have time to take me back to work. And Axel was bringing my brother home from work. And I said to him, when Axel brings you home, ask him if I can ride back to town with him. That was our first get together. But I still didn't go with him for quite a while after that. But this girlfriend of mine would say, Axel, go up and pick up Sophia and bring her in town, you know. And he'd do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that threw us together more and more. And then finally we were just going together for no reason. I went to Chicago first, then lived in Chicago for a while. And then Grandpa went to Michigan. And then I came to Michigan, and we were married here in Ecorse, Michigan.
Right.
Well, he spent some time in the civil service camp,
Oh, that's right.
4 years, I think. And he learned a little bit of brickwork there. And then when he got a job with the man who was building houses, he got a job as what they call a mud man, you know, mixing the cement. And when he caught up on that, he'd say, "Can I lay some brick?" They'd let him lay it. And when they saw how good he did, then soon he was not a mud man anymore. He was a bricklayer. Well, we were very poor. Grandpa was making $20 a week, and I was not working. And we got married. We rented a furnished house. But our landlady happened to be a drinker, and so we couldn't stay there very long because she kept us awake all night long. Oh, she was something else. And so then we rented another place. Let's see, we rented 5 places before we had a house of our own. And by then we had a brand new 5-room house. With a big attic and a big basement. On our house in Allen Park, we bought the metal awnings. Beautiful awnings with our big initial in the front and the whole bit. Well, for 3 months he didn't make a payment on them. And then he'd make a payment of 3 months plus more on the awnings, and there was no money for anything else. He was not a person who could budget things or would budget things. So I sat down and I worked out a budget, and I said, I need so much money every week so that we can pay our bills. He was very upset with me. But I got my money that I needed. And I took over the finances. And I tried to give it back to him, and he would not take it.
Good.
I think it was the mindset of people at that time, you know. It'll be like he was less of a man because he was not handling the finances. And that the woman of the house was handling the money, you know. That was a kind of a no-no. You didn't advertise that, you just kind of... I think that's the way it should be. Whichever member of the family, whatever job they can do better, they're the ones that should be doing it. That's the way I feel. Sally, I was working at a hardware store, Powell's hardware store, here in Dundee. And Sally insisted, my daughter Sally, that I go to the university and apply for a job there. And I said, what am I going to do at the university? I don't type. I don't take shorthand. I don't do any kind of office work. And she said, oh, there's other work there that you could do. So she kept after me, and finally I went and put in an application. And 2 weeks, it was a week later that I was working at the U of M. Only because Institute for Social Research had its own little supply office in their building, office supply. And they couldn't get anybody to work there. No one liked to do that kind of work. And of course, my background was clerking and selling and working in a store. So I just fell into it. It was perfect. Worked for 15 years. Loved it. Yeah. I ended up like being my own boss and running my own store the way I wanted to, and it was really nice. That was an education. I'm telling you, the way some of those people dressed, and the people with high positions, they weren't, with their cut-off jeans and holes in them all over, and of course now they pay $30 for a pair of jeans with holes in them. Well, we had one director that was really, you knew he was somebody when you saw him, because he was always in a full dress suit, shirt and tie, and he always looked like he was somebody. But then once he left, and the people that replaced him, sometimes you'd think that they were just people who had been working out in the garden. And yet they had degree upon degree upon degree.
Right.
They weren't stupid people by any means. I just loved it. I never missed work unless I was ill or took vacation time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was Catholic to begin with. Not a strong Catholic. I was christened Catholic, and I made my first Holy Communion in Catholic. And then I married Grandpa, and he was Moravian. And after the children got so they should go to Sunday school and be baptized and stuff, I decided I wanted to be Lutheran. So I took instructions in Lutheran religion, and just me. Grandpa wouldn't. So then when it was time for Andrew to be confirmed, he had to take lessons for confirmation. And Grandpa took lessons with him, and they were both confirmed together in the Lutheran church. And since then, we are Lutheran.
Okay.
Well, the one thing I didn't care about the Catholic Church was the private confessions. I did not feel I had to go and tell a priest what I did and didn't do. And in the Lutheran Church, you confess as a group. You confess for your sins, you don't name them. You confess for the sins you remember and the sins you don't remember. You ask forgiveness. Where in the Catholic Church, you have this private confession. That priest is just a man, I don't know. It just didn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I just know what I know.
Yeah.
The
That makes
Lutheran
sense.
Church here in Dundee.
Yeah.
Evangelical Lutheran Church, which is the most, what's the word I want?
The most.
It's not the least strict of all of them.
Most lenient?
Yeah, most lenient. Because there's the Wisconsin Synod can't do anything outside the church. They won't even let you join the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. They have their own thing in church. And you can't go to their church and take communion, for instance. I'm a Lutheran, and this is a Lutheran church, but I can't go there and take communion because I'm not a Wisconsin Synod Lutheran. Mm-hmm. And Missouri Synod is a little more lenient, but it also is quite strict. And we take everybody and anybody who comes, and anybody can take communion. Catholic, Methodist, doesn't matter. Years ago in a Lutheran church, when the nudists were running around, people were taking their clothes off and running up and down the street. Well, in the Lutheran church in Pennsylvania, I think, there was a couple nudists came in the middle of the service and took communion with no clothes on. And nobody even batted an eye. They gave him communion and away they went. Where if they had said something, it would have really created a lot of commotion. So they did the right thing.
Okay.
Yeah. But can you imagine what's most important? When it's time for me to die, then my soul has a place to go. And I'm going right straight up those pearly gates, steps up through the pearly gates. And I'm going to be an angel in heaven.
I don't
If you can imagine me being an angel.
It's going to be.
an angel with a little bit of an attitude, maybe.
Just tell them how to do things.
Yeah, she's good.